What's up, everybody? Welcome to the very first episode of Pass the Brew. My name is Mark Cunningham, and I am your host. And this is an amateur podcast on sports and coffee. Why do I make sure to call it an amateur podcast? Because I am not an expert in either of these things, in coffee or sports, but I'm always really excited to learn new things about it. And that's what we are going to do here on this podcast. So, what is this podcast about? Why these two things? Why sports and coffee? Well, I will tell you. Sports and coffee are two of my passions. And you might say, well, Mark, lots of people have passions and don't do podcasts about them. So why did you start a podcast? Well, I have found that when I get into something, be it a hobby, an interest, in this case, sports and coffee, I tend to get very into it and I tend to learn as much as I can. I tend to gather all this really intense knowledge that pretty much only ends up being good in random trivia questions and ends up being what most people would call useless knowledge. And it's locked in my brain and it's always there. And I tend to find when I talk to people about it who maybe aren't as interested in it, you kind of get the eye rolls and the glossing over, and they're not rude, but you can tell they're just not that interested. And so I don't talk about it all that much, which means, well, I think I don't talk about it all that much. My friends might say different, but I digress. It means I have all this knowledge in my head that I want to talk about and nobody to talk about it with. So I was like, hey, why don't you have a forum where you can either just talk to yourself or talk to exclusively people who are really excited about it? Boom, podcast. So that's what we're doing here. It is a place where I can vomit up my knowledge that I have of coffee and of sports, and we can bring on some super cool guests, some friends of mine, some people I have just met that are super knowledgeable in both these fields. It is a loose structure in terms of coffee and sports. We might end up talking about some other stuff, but most of the time, I think we'll probably stick to both. Now, it will be rare where we find people on both sides of the conversation, but I do have some people lined up for that. So sometimes the podcast will be just about coffee, and sometimes it might be just about sports. Sometimes it will be just about having cool conversations. And yeah, so I'm really excited to be able to bring this to you. For those of you that are intent on listening, you are going to learn a lot about coffee. You're going to learn a lot about some sports that I know of and other sports that my friends and acquaintances know about. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And the great thing is, I don't have to worry about people giving me eye rolls or glossing over because I can't see any of you. So that's what we're going to be doing here. That's what this podcast is about. And I am really excited to be able to bring it to you. So, a little bit about me, since this is the intro podcast. So, again, my name is Mark, and I work for a company called Muskoka Woods. I am a leadership studio facilitator, which is a fancy way of saying I teach people or I facilitate groups of people to help them learn or learn for themselves new skills in leadership, in communication, in trust, in collaboration, all that kind of stuff. We work with lots of different kinds of groups, anywhere from student councils and high school students all the way up to corporate groups and nonprofit organizations. And so that's my day-to-day job. I also am a contributor to Pro Football Focus, which is a analytics company that provides data and information to the NFL and the NCAA. And I work on their preview team, which means I take a lot of our really sort of complicated data, put it into presentations that then get sent out to clients. That's a really simple way of doing it or explaining it. It's something I really enjoy doing. I have worked on their data collection team in the past, but I just work part-time for them during the football season because American football, for my European and other listeners, is my favorite sport by far. I didn't grow up playing it. I grew up playing hockey. I think I learned to skate when I was about 3 or 4 years old. We had a pond out behind my house where my parents live, and I learned to skate on the little like two-bladed skates that you kind of strap to your boots and it's more you kind of learn to walk on ice for when you first learn to skate. But that's kind of was obsessed with hockey as a kid. I was a goaltender from age 8. I kind of got tricked into doing it. So when I went to try out for our travel team when I was 8 years old, I lined up in the line to go register for the tryout. I got to the front and they asked if I wanted to try out for goal. But what I heard was gold. And so I was like, what? As an 8-year-old, I had no idea what they were talking about. I was like, oh, is it like the higher level team? Is it like the first line? Do I get like a gold medal or something? So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And then like 3 days later, I showed up to one of the tryouts and they just handed me all this goalie equipment. I was like, ah, okay, I get it. But then I was hooked. I was instantly hooked on playing goaltender. I loved it. I love being the one to make the big diving save. I love being a goalie, and that's what I played. Played it competitively up until I was about 19. Um, so that's kind of my history in sports. After I finished playing hockey, I discovered I liked lots of other sports like rock climbing and mountain biking, and that was really when I discovered my love of football. And why do I love American football so much? It's mostly because I think of the strategy involved and the amount of different things that are going on during a game. It's not just, it's just ridiculously high pace, like passing, everybody's moving all the time. There is a stop, which I know a lot of people don't like, but it's almost like a chess game where it's reset every turn, and there's new things going on, and all these subtleties of, you don't need to watch the ball in a game. You can watch any position and there's a whole other game happening. And so that's what I love about football. And then in terms of my history with coffee, I had a lot of friends who were really into specialty coffee for a long time. I didn't drink coffee growing up. I didn't really drink coffee until my 20s. I vaguely remember drinking it in college because we had our 120-hour first aid course. And if you didn't drink coffee, you basically fell asleep. Because as interesting as first aid is, some of that stuff's pretty dry. So, but that was like out of the machine in our classroom. It was mostly cream and sugar and some caffeine that was vaguely coffee flavored. So I wasn't really a coffee drinker. And then when I started dating my now wife, Hannah, one of the first things I bought her for her birthday, she was a big coffee drinker and she traveled a lot. So I bought her an AeroPress, which for those of you that don't know is like a kind of like a French press, but it's vacuum. We'll talk about it more later on another podcast, but it's basically bulletproof. They're super durable. I bought her that and a hand grinder and some coffee, and it was great. She used it for a little bit, but she likes to get her coffee quite quickly in the morning because she needs it to wake up pretty desperately. And so she didn't use it a ton, which was fine with me. I started using it. And one of my friends, Liam, who was working for a cafe in Toronto called DeMello, sent me some coffee. And I remember brewing it, and I didn't have a scale. I didn't have a kettle. I just poured the water in and pressed it through. But I was like, holy crap, coffee can taste like that? It was like blueberries, and it was unbelievable. And my eyes were open from there. And again, it was like playing goalie. I was hooked. I was like, okay, this is it. And now I have, 6 different kinds of, I think 6. I have an AeroPress, I have a Chemex, I have a Kalita Wave, I've got a Clever Dripper, I've got a V60. I think this, whatever number that is. I've got all those different brewers sitting in my house, and I think I have about 6 different bags of coffee right now from different roasters, and 3 more on the way because I can't stop buying good coffee because it's incredible. Every time you try a new one, it's like, this is the greatest thing. So that's how I got hooked on coffee. And then when my wife and I moved to Northern Ireland, to Belfast for 2 years, I started working in coffee. So I worked as a barista for a coffee shop called Guilt Trip Coffee and Donuts, which if you don't follow their Instagram, you should. It's just at Guilt Trip Coffee. Number one, their Instagram is dope. It's just the photos are awesome. The content's great. The guys that own it, incredible. We're going to have one of the owners on for one of the podcasts, which I'm super excited about. They kind of took a chance on me. I had no experience working in coffee. I'd never worked in a cafe before. I'd never used an espresso machine. And I quickly discovered that espresso is difficult. It's very finicky. For those of you that have worked with it before, you'll understand. For those of you that haven't, you'll probably think I'm crazy because it looks really simple. You just put the portafilter into the thing and press a button and it comes out. No, there's a lot more that goes into it. But I took to it very quickly. Loved it. Started going to competitions like the AeroPress competition, latte art competitions. I just loved coffee. And when we moved back to Canada, I left that industry, but I still have a huge passion for it. And so that's kind of my history in sports and coffee. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I decided to combine these two things beyond the fact that they're 2 passions of mine. One of the things that I love about coffee, we'll start with that, is its ability to encourage conversation. Coffee is a stimulant. Everybody knows you drink it in the morning, you wake up, you're able to do your work and all this kind of stuff, but it's so much more than that. It's when taken seriously, coffee is a drink that really can encourage relationships. It can encourage community, and it really does encourage conversation, which I think as a world right now, we just need a lot more of. We need a lot more real conversation and not social media conversation. And so that's what I think coffee can do. I think when you slow it down and you take your time with coffee, it's also this incredible process. Um, from figuring out the right grind size to weighing it out to pouring the water correctly so that it's all evenly extracted. And it's not just press a button, get coffee. It's this morning or afternoon or whatever you drink it experience. And when you go back in the history of coffee, all the way back to the Oromo ethnic group in what is now known as Ethiopia, to them, coffee is a huge part of their culture. It's served 3 times during the day, and we're gonna have some guests on who are going to talk about, who know a lot more about that than I do, who are going to talk about that. But it's this idea that coffee is just more. It's so much more than just a drink. It's so much more complex, not only chemically and scientifically, but in terms of culture and relationships and community. And so I just think that's a great thing to talk about. It's not only can you have coffee and have this for yourself, but when you get other people involved, it's just so much bigger. And then when we think about sports, sports is just like that as well. It's this thing that brings people together from across tons of different kinds of divides, whether it's cultural divides, country divides, whether it's economic divides, political divides, religious divides. You will see people in a stadium turn and hug a complete stranger who they don't know anything about, but they are cheering for a common goal. They're pushing for their team to accomplish something, and it gets everybody excited and everybody happy, and everybody gets to feel emotions together. That those 30,000 people you're sitting with are feeling the same amount of elation as you uh, when a goal is scored or a touchdown is scored or something like that. You also know they're feeling your pain when your team loses. It's a common thing. We get to feel things together, and we empathize with each other and with the team. And this is all much more complicated than just cheering for a team, but at a deeper level, that's what sports is all about. When you think about that as a fan, when you think about it as an athlete, it's this place where it's a meritocracy. It's my effort directly reflects my position in a team for the most part. Sports at its ideal is this. Obviously, there's lots of politics involved in sports and things like that. But when we think about the ideals of what sports are, it's about bringing people together from all different kinds of backgrounds, finding the best of the best, and putting them together in a place where they're going to work together for a common goal. So again, we see this concept not only as fans, we're cheering for a common goal, but the team itself is working together for a common goal. And so these two things, coffee and sports, though they might seem extremely different, are very similar in that they are bringing people together. And as we look at our world right now, we desperately need more of that. We desperately need more places that encourage conversation, encourage us to look at things the same way from different perspectives, but be pushing for the same goal. And I think that's what coffee and sports can do. That's why I'm really excited to talk about it more. I'm really excited to bring people in to talk about it. I'm excited for you guys to learn more. I'm excited to learn more. I wish I could tell you the list of people that I have lined up for this, but I don't want to spoil the surprise. But next week, we have an incredible conversation with some super cool people. So I'm not going to ruin it because I actually haven't decided the order that I'm releasing them yet. I am recording a couple tomorrow. As I speak, I'm going to be recording them tomorrow. So I'm not going to ruin the surprise, but I got some super cool guests that are super knowledgeable, and I really, really am excited for just the future of where this podcast can go. And I'm excited for the conversations that it's going to start. I'm excited for the potential connections it's going to create, and that it's already created. I've met some incredible people just by reaching out and saying, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast. It's about these two things. Are you interested?" And the response is always really good. So I'm going to have some friends on. I'm going to have some people who I've only connected with over Instagram. So that'll be my first conversation with them, which will be really exciting. But yeah, that's what Pass the Brew is all about. It is about conversations, community, and connections. And I'm so excited to be able to share my passions and other people's passions with you, our listeners, and hopefully our friends as we go through this journey together. And I'm also excited to have a place where I can talk about all of my ridiculous knowledge that isn't useful in any other forum and not have anybody roll their eyes or try to check out or anything like that. So that's what this is all about. That's the intro podcast. Super excited to get started. We'll be launching the first episode a week from whenever this one comes out. So whatever date that is, a week from that day, we'll release the first one, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But thanks for tuning in, everybody. Again, my name is Mark Cunningham. This is Pass the Brew, and can't wait to see what the future holds for us.